The views and opinions expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution which any panel member is associated. Reproduction or dissemination other than for the purpose of education or information without the express written permission of the Phoenix Research Institute or Nova Society Media is strictly prohibited.
I'd like to welcome everyone back to the Nova Society. I'm your host, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and I'm here with my panel, Dr. Scott Gershwer and Dr. Mark Bound. Today, our panel, with only days before the 2024 presidential election, will answer some of our listener questions. Our question is from Mike, who lives in Manchester, New Hampshire. Mike says, I am a former student at the university you all know and wanted to shout out to professors Weldon, Gershwer, and Bound. He says he took a class from Dr. Bound a couple of terms ago and loved all the insights, and just recently had Dr. Gershwer and loved his class. And yes, Mike has graduated, and he thanks you both. He says he's never had Dr. Weldon, but he might soon, Mike, because you say you are continuing your academic journey for your master's. So I look forward to having you in class. And Mike continues, I know you've all discussed this before about the Electoral College, and I agree with you that it is all past time to get rid of it. But I also agree that this will probably never happen. And I've heard rhetoric that if the Democrats win, MAGA might start a civil war. So I wanted to know, do you think this is possible? And what if MAGA wins? Would the majority who voted for Harris reject the Electoral College win? What might a civil war in the 21st century America look like? So Mike's got 3 questions for us today.
Oh, boy.
Oh, boy.
They're good questions.
Mike, did you learn this in our classes?
Yeah, really. I mean, is this something you got out of us? Anyway, sounds like us. Civil war. I guess it all depends on how you define civil war. So I guess I'll take the last part first. A civil war in the United States of the 21st century is not going to be North versus South. It is not going to be fought with armies. That is not the way this is going to work. First, when you look at it, let's take my home state now of South Carolina. Yes, Lindsey Graham is, if he was running, and Donald Trump will probably win South Carolina, but he will probably only win it with like 57% of the vote, 58% of the vote. 42% of the population will vote against him. South Carolina can't be all in a civil war when 42% of the population is against you. So in my mind, a civil war in the 20th century would look more like terrorism. It will be under the surface. It'll be disruption. It'll be things like that. People, showing that they're ticked off by the results of a free and fair election and, engaging in activity that in any other country, if it was happening, we'd be saying it was terrorism. So this concept of, 2 great armies coming together against each other, that is not going to be the case, because let's face it, we have this most powerful military on the face of the earth. The United States federal government does. And I don't care how many AR-15s you have, you're not going to stand up against the United States military. Oh, and by the way, the bullet they shoot you with, you paid for. So that's a little bit of irony for you when you look at it like that. So, no. Is it possible MAGA would start a civil war? In the context that I've put it, yeah, I think it's fully possible. I think you've got enough crazy people out there that would be happy. Again, chaos just for the sake of chaos. If the Electoral College wins, but Kamala Harris wins by 15 million votes, I'm really not sure how anybody's going to react to that. I mean, we've heard that from Brooklyn that Jeffries, if he's the Speaker of the House, will accept the Electoral College win. The question is will the people, that overwhelming number of people that voted, go with the win? The other times that the president was not elected by popular vote, again, you look back to 2016, we're only talking 3 million. If it had happened during the Biden win in 2020, that would have been 7 or 8 million. Now the question comes down, if Harris wins, again, Electoral College is a funny thing. She could win by 15, heck, she could win by 20 million votes and still lose the election in the Electoral College. What would that 20 million people do? Hard to tell. Really very, very difficult to tell.
In a sense, that war has already begun, right? We're seeing people firebombing drop boxes and, committing acts of intimidation at voting sites and things like that. So there's definitely an undercurrent, at least, of violence going on right now in the United States. Again, I'm going to continue my theme of I have faith in the American people, and that I do believe that Trump will lose this election. I don't believe he's going to go quietly. But if he wanted to start a civil war, he should have done it when he was in power and not Joe Biden. And so I don't see it ending well for them, or even getting very far at all, because the government is not under his control anymore, whereas it was in 2020. And he still proved himself to be, a fairly cowardly person, which I think is basically what he is, who disappointed his followers, who were ready with weapons, ready to storm the Capitol, ready for him to say the word, and they would have gone back over the Potomac River to Virginia, gotten their weapons, and come back into D.C., and he didn't do that. And I don't see him doing it now. And I do believe that that they'll be ready for it to happen on Election Day, the day after Election Day, for weeks after Election Day, throughout the entire process that we go through, the votes in December in states, all the lawsuits, which they've already started that. So they're going to try to do this through a legal process if they can, and right up until Inauguration Day, probably past January 6th and into Inauguration Day, that there's going to be a lot of rumbling and a lot of potential for violence, but that ultimately it's not going to happen. And I think that the reason for that is that he hasn't really ran a great race. It's been close, but his bizarre decision making really does seem more geared towards an aftermath of the election than like a get out the vote effort on Election Day itself, and that he's taking it for granted that he's going to have the power to do what he wanted to do but wouldn't in 2020 without that power. And I think that he thinks, and again, this is very Trumpy, right, that Biden did that. Biden pulled that off from the basement, right? Biden somehow convinced the FBI not to look into the laptop or whatever it is that their story is on that one. That Biden somehow manipulated votes, that Biden somehow got the election machines to change the votes and things like that, all at the same time as Biden was hunkering down in a basement, afraid to come out. So he thinks that Biden did that, and he may think that he's going to be able to do it now that he's out of power. But I don't think that will be the case. And I don't think that that once he loses the election, his followers in Congress are necessarily going to go along with him. His base might, right? His less responsible people that follow him, they might want to do that. And so I would expect that there would be little bits of skirmishes here and there, as we've already seen. I'm hoping that there's nothing worse than that, but again, who can say for sure? But I think that he's going to prove himself a spent force, and that the people in his party who have been beholden to him for some, it'll take years for us to figure out what that was all about, will no longer be that. And that the Lindsey Grahams and even probably Mike Johnson and the rest of them, while they will go forward with lawsuits and things like that, will not dare try to pull what they did before.
What about the secret that, the one that Mike Johnson said, it has a secret. You have to stay silent about a secret, or it's not.
I mean, Mike Johnson's got a lot of secrets, and they probably will come out at some point. But I don't know, we've discussed them on this podcast before with this 12-year-old boy, whatever he was, 15-year-old boy that he had when he was 25 years old and still single and not yet prayed to get the gay away. So Mike Johnson does have his fair share of secrets, but I don't think Mike Johnson is. When Trump said that the other day, you know what I thought of immediately? How Hitler was telling people that they have these miracle weapons that they were going to use at the end of World War II, and that there was a certain part of the population that was like, but we have these wonder weapons, these miracle weapons that Hitler is promising us, and they're going to use them, and that's going to turn the tide of the war, and the British and the Americans will sue for peace, and we'll be able to keep our Reich together, That was what I was reminded of when he said we have this secret, that there is no secret, there is no weapon, there is nothing. He's just giving hope, because a lot of times he lives on hope. He lives on that hope that something will happen great for him.
Yeah. It's kind of like his economic plan. He has a concept of a secret.
Right.
So that's basically about it. I think it'll be interesting to see how both sides react to this. And yes, if there has never been an argument for getting rid of the Electoral College, and Mike, you're right, it'll never happen, because without the Electoral College, it'd be very difficult for a Republican to get elected into the presidency. There's no better example than the 2024 election. So there you have it.
Thank you, Mike, and I hope to see you in class. And thank you again to all our listeners as we count down the final few days before the 2024 election. Thank you both, and we will see you next time on the Nova Society.
So that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our sponsors for this episode. BH Conflict Resolution Services, a full-service dispute resolution firm offering expert and cost-effective mediation services to couples, groups, and businesses. BHCRS can be reached at www.bhcrs.com. We'd also like to thank our podcast partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing partners, and Podkite, who does all of our analytics. iHeartRadio, where people get their music and podcasts, Apple iTunes, the largest source for music and podcasts on the internet, Spotify, the most popular source for the Nova Society. The Nova Society is available on all of these and other quality platforms. We'd like to thank all of our listeners. Without you, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a comment, question, or would like to be a guest on the Nova Society, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. Always remember, the power of society is knowledge. So for Dr. Scott Gershwer, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and all of us here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Be well, and we hope to see you again next time.